Hey everyone, Dockwell here, and welcome to another one of my Dota 2 hero guides. Today we're going to be taking a look at Magnus. So Magnus is one of those heroes that can be played mid, offlane, or even support depending on the patch, depending how good he is and how good his abilities are in that patch. But what I'm going to focus on is mid Magnus, and that's because as a mid with Magnus, you do everything that the other roles do. The difference is you get farm for yourself, and you can do a lot of damage in fights. So we'll take a look at what allows him to, do what he does with his abilities and those kinds of things. But essentially what Magnus can do is he can be a huge game winner in team fights with his ultimate. And he can do that from the support role and the offlane role. He also does that from the mid role. It's just that with the mid, you look for your own farm in the beginning of the game, you get a lot of items, and you can do a lot of right-click damage along with being a crazy team fighter with your ultimate. So that's why I want to focus on mid Magnus. And as a mid Magnus, you're going to want to look for your own farm, like I said. Push out the wave, you don't really dominate, you just push out the mid wave, you go to the jungle, you get stacks or whatever, you farm really quickly because of your innate built-in Battle Fury basically skill, and that's what we'll see in a second. And then once you hit 6, you kind of want to look to rotate as you can when it's possible so that you can use your ultimate off cooldown whenever it's off cooldown and you can use it. You want to look to get a kill because it is such a long cooldown. It's best to use it when you can. Now, you don't want to force it or anything because he doesn't have too much innate mobility. Like sometimes you just need a blink dagger before you can get your ult off. But depending on the game, depending on the matchups and those kinds of things, you usually want to be using your ult to get those kills, to kill the mid, to kill the enemy safe lane carry, whatever it is when you get that ult. But then generally you want to be looking for your farm, using your Battle Fury ability off cooldown on yourself or your enemy or your allied carry to just speed up the farm, get a lot of farm quickly. And so Magnus is kind of like an alchemist in that way. Not exactly. He's just like a mini alchemist in the sense that he can get a lot of farm very, very quickly, quicker than a lot of other mids and a lot of other heroes because of that innate built-in Battle Fury. And so that's how you basically want to think of Magnus in the entirety of the game. Get your farm up, use your ult off cooldown, and then later in the game, you just want to be that threat with your ults, and you can do a lot of right-click damage. If you get AC, if you get Daedalus, those kinds of things. So that's how you can think about Magnus, and now we'll take a look at his abilities to see how we execute that in the game with those abilities. So now that we understand Magnus in general, we can take a look at his abilities and what allows him to play that mid role, but also support and other things to get a lot of farm, but also do a lot of havoc and create a lot of chaos in team fights. So first, we're just going to take a look at his Shockwave ability. This is probably his, not least effective ability, but it's his least, amazing ability or standout ability that defines him. It's just pretty simple. You see it has a long, or a pretty big AoE there, and that's because you just cast it in a direction, it shoots out, does damage in that line that you shot it at. Now, along with that, it also has a few other parts to it in that you can shoot it out, and if it hits someone or an enemy hero, it brings them back along the line like you saw there, does some damage, and also slows for about 1 second. So it's pretty simple. It's just an ability that can do some chaos, slows a little bit, and repositions people a little bit, but it honestly just does a decent amount of damage, especially early. When you have mana to do it, it helps you farm and those kinds of things. But then we'll move on to the next ability, which is Empower, and this is the real farming ability. This is one of the defining Magnus abilities in that it just gives you a free Battle Fury. And we can see now by the description, this changes sometimes, it's changed in the past, where Magnus currently receives a larger bonus for the damage that you get from Empower. So in the past, it was kind of even, and so you could just pick this hero as like a 5 position and then just give Empower, just follow your carry around the map and just give him Empower. That's not as good now because of this bonus that you get. And that bonus just means that you want to be playing Magnus as a core so you can use this on yourself, do extra damage, and get more farm. But it's pretty simple. If we just, we're clicking this dummy target here, we see we're doing about this much DPS. We just add the Empower to ourselves, and here we're doing a lot more DPS. It's pretty simple. It just gives you extra damage and then allows you to cleave creeps like we see here. We didn't really see it as well there, so I'll just go to the next creep wave, and we can take a look at the cleave. So we'll see this here. We see it's cleaving. There's a little effect every time it cleaves. So it's basically just a free Battle Fury, like I said. And it allows you to farm extremely quickly. It allows you to basically clear the mid wave and then go jungle and just get up items faster than a lot of heroes because you have you can have basically a Battle Fury at level 1. Now, you're obviously not going to skill this level 1 all the time, but it is just one of those things that you can have a Battle Fury before any other hero in the game. And so it just allows you to be really, really good. And then you want to be kind of using this when it's off cooldown once, especially once it's max level on yourself to get a lot of farm. And even when you are mid, you can use it on your allied carry to give them more farm and more damage as well. So that's just Empower. It's one of the defining skills of Magnus, and a lot of whether he's good or not depends on how this ability works. And now next we're going to look at Skewer. This is another kind of Magnus defining ability, obviously, but it's not like the key one. I think the two keys are Empower and his ultimate, but this one's kind of one of those mobility spells. You just charge in a direction and he just goes there over cliffs and those kinds of things. But the other thing that it does is it brings along enemy heroes with him. So if we see this, Axe is here, well, I'm going to use Skewer, and I'm going to skewer him all the way back here. And it's just one of those things that can be really, really annoying in team fights. You reposition people, you can like blink in here, and then, you can blink in here and then skewer the guy back, and it just puts him out of position. He just gets blown up and dies. And then another thing you can notice that when it is cast, when I do use it, he also is briefly slowed, and it does some damage to him as well. So it's kind of one of those spells that does a little bit of everything. A little bit of slow, kind of a stun briefly while he's being pushed back. It does some damage, and then it repositions heroes. You can even push people on cliffs and those kinds of things. It's just really, really good. Really, really good mobility spell overall. And so that's basically Skewer. And now we can look at RP. And so RP is the other defining Magnus ability. It's basically Empower allows him to be a core and farm really quickly. RP, Reverse Polarity, allows him to be a crazy good team fighter because this is one of the best ultimates in the game, along with like Black Hole and other things like that. This is just so good, and that is because it's an AoE ability that stuns people, and it stuns them through BKB. So as we see, we can put BKB on Axe here. We'll just get Axe of BKB. We'll have Axe activate the BKB, and we can come up here, blink in, and use our ults, and we see Axe is stunned through the BKB, and Axe cannot do anything. So it's just one of those abilities that is so, so good, especially late game, because a BKB piercing stun is always so amazing in Dota. And as we can see, it's also good because it has that AoE, and so it's not just that it captures one person, but it captures basically everyone in this AoE and puts them in front of Magnus. So we can just demonstrate that here, as it puts everyone in front of Magnus, and then Magnus can start clicking them for a while. And let's just say you have Empower on, and you are a core Magnus. Well, you can do this, and then you start clicking people. You're doing a ton of damage. Maybe you have Echo Saber, maybe you have AC, maybe you have Crit, like I've described. You're just doing a crazy ton of damage. You can get maybe 2 or 3 people in that ultimate. You can kill all of them in that short period of time if you're a core Magnus. So that's one of the reasons that this hero is so good, and one of the reasons why this hero is played mid a lot. So that is pretty much RP. Now the other thing to consider is that with Skewer, I showed you that you could skewer one person. You can also skewer basically everybody in your path. And so that's why, I actually skewered the other Axe over here onto that cliff. So that's a good demonstration of that. I didn't really try that. But you can use RP to basically RP everybody in this AoE in front of you and then skewer all of them out of position. So not only can you stun them through BKB, but then you can use this combo of spells to get them so out of position that they are, the team fight is just won because of 2 of your spells. And now if you're doing damage as a core, it's just, the game is just kind of over. The team fight is over at that point. So that's why Magnus can be so, so good. Now, I am going to look at one other ability, and that is his Shard ability. I usually don't do this, but this is one of these that is so good, and it's honestly one of the biggest reasons that Magnus is getting picked right now. And that's because it just adds another ability to his kit to get people out of position and to stun people. And pretty much all this does is you just press it, and it's called Horn Toss. Anyone in front of him, it just like pushes them behind him, and it stuns them for a short period of time. So basically, someone just there, you can just click this, it lifts them up in the air and stuns them and does a little bit of damage. And why that's so good is because with Skewer and even RP, sometimes it's really annoying to have to blink in. Like, you do this, and then you want to walk this way, and then you go like this, because you want to skewer the enemy, obviously, back to your team, but, maybe you want to get that blink, and you're blinking in front of them, and it's just weird with the positioning. Well, now, with this, Horn Toss, you no longer have to care about that. You can just go here, RP, Horn Toss, and then skewer back. It's just an extra layer of disable, an extra layer of positioning that allows you to be really, really effective. And then also, without him going mid, now it allows that offlane Magnus, that maybe support Magnus, to be even more effective with only a Blink Dagger. Because you don't even need to use RP now. And you can basically just insta-kill people because you'll jump in, do this, skewer back, and like, look, they're pretty much screwed now because you skewer them all the way back. You just use 2 abilities. You still have RP. You know, when the team fight keeps going, or when Blink is back off cooldown, you can use it again. I mean, this only has a 30-second cooldown, so like you can use it multiple times. You're just doing this, skewing people back. It's just so effective in team fights to get pickoffs, those kinds of things. It's just an added extra layer of control of team fight, like I talked about, and it can be really, really, really effective to use this to pick people off and get people out of position. I believe in one of the recent qualifier games we saw Magnus being used against a Medusa to get her out of position because she doesn't have a lot of mobility, and they would just blow up the Medusa with this Horn Toss and skewer combo, and it just won the team the game because Medusa was out of position all the time. Because they were just allowed to use this combo off of cooldown. So that's pretty much Magnus. That's his abilities. As you can see, he can do a lot of damage because he farms very quickly, but he also has so much control that he's always going to be one of these heroes that if you're good with him, if you pick him, if you know what you're doing, you can win games just straight up by yourself. And so that's Magnus. Now that we know his abilities and what they do and how to be effective with them, we can take a look at a game and somewhat implementing that in an actual game. So now we're going to take a look at a replay of Dendi playing Magnus here. And we'll see that he goes for Shockwave first. This is basically to secure last hits and range creeps. We briefly saw that he was going to try to use it to secure that range creep, but he knew that he wasn't going to time it very well, so he just didn't waste the mana. But really what I want to show you is that he's going to use his second ability to get Skewer for his second skill point, and he's going to use this to do a little trick in the mid lane especially that is really, really good to learn to do on Magnus. So we see Lina misses the stun, and now he knows he can be aggressive. So he'll use the Shockwave and then skewer her back under the tower to do a ton of damage because Lina just takes 3 or 4 right clicks from the tower, and now Lina is extremely low health. And that's just one of those things that it's something that you always want to know that you can do and try to do with Magnus, especially in mid lane. And even on the side lanes, you can, you know, if you're laning close to your own tower as off lane or support or something like that, you can get people and skewer them under the tower and make them, you know, get first blood or make them die, make them take a lot of damage by doing that. Now, this is a really, really hard matchup for Magnus against Alina with long range and a stun and all those kinds of things, so it's not the greatest of matchups. We see he's still doing pretty well in the CS, though, and that's because he has this ability with Shockwave. He has a good amount of damage with his Empower, but the main reason that he's able to do decently in this lane is honestly because he was able to get that really, really good start with skewering the Lina under the tower and just getting her really, really low health to start the match off, to start the lane off. And so now from here, we'll pretty much just see that as Magnus is getting more levels, he's just going to start empowering himself and going to the jungle. Like, look at this. It's not even 3 minutes, and he comes to kill this small camp, and he has his support stacking for him. But even if the support wasn't there, he probably would have stacked that big camp. That's why he went up there. And so you'll just see that, you know, he's already stacking, or already taking 2 jungle camps at around 3 minutes. He's just going back here to push the wave in, and if he wasn't against Lina, he'd probably be even safer to push this wave in than he is currently right now. And obviously Lina's a really good player, so she's denying and those kinds of things and stopping the Magus from getting as much farm as he wants, but this is the general idea of how you want to play Magus in the lane. And you even see Lina, as a good player, is trying to go over there and disrupt Magnus's ability to farm that small camp. And now he's even saying, like, it's just kind of this weird battle where at this higher level, they're, like, trying to take each other's farm. He even skewers the Lina onto the high ground here, and now she has to come back and waste that TP. But it's just this whole game because Lina knows that Magnus just wants to farm the jungle, push out the wave, farm the jungle. So now, because that player's good enough to know what Magnus wants to do, she's kind of trying to contest, and then Magnus goes back over and says, well, you know what, you're going to do this, I'm just going to farm your jungle. And it's this whole weird cat and mouse game because of how good Magnus is at farming so quickly early on in the game, and because the Lina knows what Magnus wants to do. But that's generally how you want to think about Magnus. You want to think about Magnus as, okay, I want to go jungle and hit that small camp probably sooner than almost any other hero in the game. And that's the key to Magnus, then pushing out the lane and going to farm that jungle. So that's pretty much Magnus's laning stage. It's really just as simple as that, honestly, is just push out the wave, farm the jungle, do what you can to stack and those kinds of things. So we jumped ahead a little bit here. Not very much, though, because we see that Magnus hit 6. We kind of saw that earlier, but now, as soon as he hits 6, kind of like very early on, they try to get a gank on the mid here because they know, you know, Lina's not going to do well against these stuns. So he almost didn't even need to use his RP, but he eventually did need to actually blow it there just to secure that kill. But it's one of those things, it's just an example of you can be extremely dangerous to the enemy mid and even the enemy safe lane hero if you hit 6 and you know how to use it and you get, like, you know, someone else on your team, another stun on your team or something like that to help gank. You can just blow people up. You can have a lot of control with that ultimate. So that's a good example of how early on in the game you want to be using that ult on when it's off cooldown, and get that ult on cooldown and get a kill from it. And now, basically, now that he doesn't have an ult anymore, there's pretty much only one thing to do, and that is farm the jungle. Pretty simple, like we talked about earlier. So the next thing I want to show you here is just the idea of how you want to play Magnus once you get your Blink Dagger. So basically I just skipped ahead like 5 minutes or so because he was just farming his Blink. He was honestly just hitting jungle, hitting the lane whenever he could, but now he has his Blink. So he's kind of going to clear the wave out one more time and then immediately look to be aggressive once he has his Blink. He's still going to farm a little bit, because, you know, he just showed mid, those kinds of things. He wants to push out the lane. He still wants to concentrate on farming. But now that he has his Blink, he knows that, you know, he's going to empower the AM because it just gives AM extra ability to farm. But now he's going to focus a little bit more on trying to get kills here. Because he's going to, you know, now he hooks up with his Lion to get a kill mid there. They go immediately from that to they're just looking around the map. You see, he's not really hitting creeps anymore. They look around the map. They go bottom here to kill this this Brewmaster, and that's 2 kills in a row that they get, largely off of his Blink and also the ability of Lion to, you know, help with team fights. And that's kind of what you want to do, is you want to be farming. He goes for Echo Saber first, which is pretty standard. But once you get that Blink, especially on mid Magnus, that's when you want to start kind of transitioning away from focusing 100% on your farm and getting your items up to then transitioning into fighting, to team fighting, to using your skewer, to using your ultimate. You see, he got 2 kills without even having to use his ultimate there. And now he farmed a little bit and then went again to get another kill with his skewer, and he still hasn't used his ultimate. And that's because it's not always, I did say, you know, you want to use your ultimate on cooldown. That is true. You want to be looking to use your ultimate on cooldown. In other words, once you have your ultimate up, it's always good to be a threat on the map, to be, you know, because to make the enemy scared. But it is one of those things that once you do use your ult, and the enemy knows it's on cooldown, they can play more aggressive. And so you saw there that he was able to get 3 kills without even committing his ult, and that's really, really good. Now, it's obviously because they also have a Lion stun that he's ganking with, so it helps there. So it just depends. Like right here, he didn't have the Lion to back him up, so he just gets another kill with the RP this time. So it is a matter of having the Lion there, having the Lion to help, those kinds of things. But it is one of those things that, like, he just got 4 kills, and he didn't even have to use his ult except for one of them, and he was able to get that solo kill on the Nyx there with his ult. So it's just, that I think is a great example of how you want to think about Magnus, is you want to think about how he's able to farm really, really quickly in the early game, but then once he gets his Blink Dagger, you want to be aggressive on the map with your ultimate and those kinds of things. And you see, he didn't have his ultimate there, and they still went in because they thought, okay, we still have the Lion to back us up to get kills, but they turned it around because, you know, the Ursa was able to react with his ultimate, those kinds of things. It didn't really work out as well. Maybe if he had his ult up, it would have been easier. And the enemy team knew, okay, he doesn't have RP, so we can get a little bit more aggressive. There isn't that turnaround potential. So I think that little segment there is just a good way to view Magnus, to understand how Magnus works in the game overall. And we just see him constantly, as I just keep talking here, we just see him more and more times going with that Lion to try to get pickoffs. Now, it doesn't work out fully there. They do get the Lina, but they both end up dying, and the Underlord isn't able to get them out in time. But it's just the general idea. And you see, especially because they have an AM on the team, the AM is just farming like crazy now. He's making a ton of space, and I think that's the best way to think of Magnus. Unless, you know, there's some reason that you think that you're able to farm way better than your carry or something, or, you know, you just don't want to be, you know, dying a ton. I would say that it's best to play Magnus in this way where you're, yes, you are focusing on your farm, but you're also using that ult to create a ton of space for your carry as well and get a lot of kills and pickoffs in the mid game. So that is pretty much what I wanted to show you there. I think that's a good segment of how to play Magnus. Maybe you can rewatch that and just see how Dendi works and how he looks at the map and how he goes around the map and what he does there exactly to make his hero effective with all of his different abilities. So I think that's a great example of Magnus mid game. So now we jumped ahead just a little bit here, not very much, and we're going to see Magnus just got his BKB. The AM is pretty farmed, and they're going to look to be really aggressive with this BKB and this RP that's up. And watch what happens here. He uses the RP on two supports, and they blow them up instantly, and now, like, the enemy cannot do anything. Like, yes, the enemy, the Panda, pops his ult there because, like, I don't know, they're going to try to do something to turn around. They know that RP's blown, but it's a 3v5 right now. And although RP and that BKB is off cooldown, like, it's just so hard for the enemy to fight 3v5 once you blow up the two supports like that. It doesn't always have to be a support. Imagine if he caught the Ursa. Imagine if he caught even another core in that. It would have just been even worse for the enemy. And now they get another pickoff because, you know, the enemy team was like, oh, we got to be aggressive with RP on cooldown. It just snowballs from there because there's almost nothing you can do. And that's a great example about how, I mean, this is a little bit like mid-game, later mid-game, how RP can just be the turning point in a fight because it really can delete one or two heroes, just completely remove them from the game. And there's almost nothing that the enemy can do at that point. And so here is just a continuation of the team fight. The game is just honestly snowballing from here because now the Panda's dead. It's just like one fight after another. They're being aggressive. They don't even need RP because that first RP just snowballed this fight. It's like one continuous fight for the next few minutes. And then just, again, Magnus just keeps catching people out of position with this skewer combo. And so it's another great example of how Dendi's able to use skewer and use this blink, not even with RP, to catch people out of position. And the game is just so hard for the enemy at this point. Largely off of Dendi and his Magnus, his skewer abilities, combining with that Lion, using his RP to just win the game. And you see how that one RP on those two supports essentially just won them the game. It got them a set of racks just from that one ability over the course of these last like 2 minutes. And so I think that's just a great example of how Magnus can kind of solo win games, honestly, with his abilities there. And that I think is a great example of that. So this last clip that I want to show you is an example of how Magnus doesn't have to use his ultimate to initiate. Although it is a good initiation tool, in some ways it's almost a better counter-initiation tool. Allow the fight to break out first, and then kind of judge in the backline what the best possible RP can be. And you'll see he uses it there, he gets the Lina, and almost every single Brewling, he barely misses one. And he's able to counter-initiate and just blow up the Lina instantly, and the fight is then won. It was kind of looking like a, you know, it was a fight that was kind of, you weren't really sure which way it was going to go. It seemed pretty good, but then the Brew was able to pop his ult, and it was just kind of on the fence there. And he was able to look at the fight, diagnose it from far away, and then blink into the perfect spot to get an RP on enough heroes to just win the fight from there. So we saw earlier in the game about how he was able to initiate with that RP, with his abilities and his BKB, to make sure that the fight was won, that the game was honestly won from there. But then here in this fight, it's a great example of how he was able to counter-initiate. Now that his team is strong, his AM is strong, his Underlord is strong, he allows them to go in first, start the fight, and then he counter initiates once he sees that the fight can be turned here, that he can get a really, really good RP off. And so that is basically how you play Magnus, is you farm for yourself early on in the game. Then once you hit 6 and once you get your Blink Dagger especially, you look to use your Skewer, you look to use your RP to essentially snowball the game, win fights, pick off people, and then in team fights later on you can use your RP to really just dominate the game, counter initiate, those kinds of things. So that, everyone, is my Magnus guide. As always, guys, I hope this was informative for you and helps you play better in the future. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them in the comments below. If you want me to take a look at one of your replays, then just let me know. Give me the replay number below, and I'd be happy to take a look at your game and give you some advice, regardless of the hero or the position. So, as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.